There was one question regarding Mr. David's presentation. I believe it was when in the slide David brought from the data that was presented by the research in Japan. There was this graphic in which there was information about the commercial energy use and the residential one. There is this question, how is the sudden drop in commercial energy use, which was the blue line, around 2005 explained? So
Alexandra,
yeah.
I can make answer. I think it's related to the economical crisis having happened around 2005 or 6. It was started in US. It's a very famous tragedy, economical tragedy there. I think the sudden drop of the energy use in commercial building sector, it's related to that event, economical event. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you.
So Takeo's answer is that it's the United States' fault. That's what I heard, but that's okay, Takeo.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask David, what is the strategy the working group has to connect with the work and the results that are acquired from the annexes, such as the Annex 70, in order to bring some inputs to the working group?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And look, the answer is our strategy is very organic. And by that, I mean, we, since these are, of course, functions of the EBC, we have many overlapping participants, including obviously Ian, the operating agent for 70, as well as many others who are either EXCO members or operating agencies, Bjorn and Ian and quite a few others. And you know, I could say we have a strategy, but I think it's more accurate to say that it's organic and we do what we can. So it's an invitation, again, as in the same spirit I raised earlier, that if any of you are involved in an annex, whether you're on the EBC EXCO or an operating agent or a participant, or just somebody who reads their work, that doesn't matter to us. If you're involved in an annex and you see a connection with codes, please contact me and we'll make those connections work. But again, I think, and I'll defer to Cal, but again, the broader challenge to all of us, but to the EBC and IEA more broadly is, right, how do we take these myriad policy tools and market tools and try to find the connections? So that's the piece of what we're doing.
Thank you very much, David. While we wait for other questions from the audience, I would like to ask to Ian and Hiroto, how do you deal with confidentiality issues regarding the energy consumed data from the utility companies?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. So in the data registry, we don't actually we don't collect and hold any of the data. But I think the key issue there is with the registry, what we're doing is identifying that data exists. And actually, energy companies are really quite key to a lot of this in that they are whether they're simply the kind of pass-through for an owner who actually owns the data associated with a meter placed there by a company, just understanding that it exists and how it's used. So one of the things that we've seen in Europe and the introduction of the GDPR, the General Data Practice Guidelines, which require companies to tell the consumer what information they have and how they use it. Now, building energy from meter data, for example, it needs to be conveyed to the owner of that information, i.e. the occupant. how it's being used. But we, as a group who are interested in better understanding and making use of or accessing that data where appropriate, want to be able to identify that it exists, what it comprises, what it contains, and then how others might, if possible, make use of it. That we ourselves are not looking exactly at that issue of confidentiality, but it's an important one. And it's one which, when we undertook a survey, which Hiroto showed you some of the results for, we did ask a question, which is how open should data be? And we got a variety of answers. In fact, the German colleagues and the Japanese colleagues were among the most reserved in terms of data making available, whereas the UK and the US were actually quite open with making data available. So it's very different and challenging. But perhaps Hiroto, you'd like to also comment on this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, has finished the comment. I just add the Japanese situations for the using the information from the smart meters. Now we have a 3 kind of route to use the information of smart meter. Route A is the way the utility company use the information of the smart meter. So this is very ordinary ways. And route B is a housing owner can use the information of the smart meter. So of course they can use the information. And route C is the third-party companies can use the smart meter informations. And we have a long discussion about what kind of services should be provided with this third-party companies or the organizations. Still on progress. And sometimes the energy companies can provide the area energy consumptions, you know. So energy companies cannot provide each building energy consumption data. But for example, these blocks, there are the 50, 60 buildings, and the energy company sometimes can provide the total energy consumption of these 50, 60 buildings. So if we can understand the total floor areas of the blocks or the AGs, if we can get these kind of information, this kind of information can be used for understanding the actual conditions. But these are the because of the confidentialities of the informations.
Okay, thank you. There is other question. The primary consumption parameters of building are mostly about HVAC, appliances, lights in your presentation of Mr. Takaguchi. What about building design parameters? Are they considered as a considered parameter to measure the energy consumption of buildings?
Building envelopes and also the efficiency of the equipment. So both unified.
Okay.
Alexandra, may I comment on this?
Yeah.
So, but this raises an important issue. Building energy codes, like some other policy interventions, really only look at the fixed assets of buildings, by and large, right? And they may be the really fixed, as we discussed earlier, the envelope and windows and foundation, or the semi-fixed, the equipment and the lighting. But as we know, over time, the share of energy use that is not represented by those end uses is growing because of all the miscellaneous electric loads, et cetera. And so that's one of the challenges before building codes is that, again, no matter how effective they are, they're not going to affect all the computers or the kitchen appliances or all the other end uses. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
And just to add to David, I think this is really important around where minimum energy performance standards for appliances, can come in here. So as we manage both the design element of it through the codes and through the fixed assets for the systems, we have to have alongside that, but not embedded within the codes, although I suppose they could be to an extent, is standards for appliances.
And some would say Yeah, and there's some borderline areas, right, Ian? Whether, this lighting is plug-in and this lighting is fixed wiring. There's some borderline areas. And there are others who would say we should regulate through codes or other means using direct current. I think that's, as we say, I think a bridge too far in modern society, but, right?
Yes,
Anyhow,
getting to the point where we start to reduce the size of the plug load by simply kind of fixing the amperage set is one way to do it, but presumably that's not very attractive.
No.
Yeah. So I think we don't have more questions now.
Alexandra, may I ask Ian a question? Do we have a minute?
Yeah, for
Ian,
sure.
forgive my ignorance, but you talked about, or maybe Aretha, I'll ask you both. You talked about all your different data sets and that you don't own them, but that it's a repository. But how meaningful is it for these data sets? Can they talk to each other? And is there enough? I don't know if the word is interoperability or semantic likeliness. Is there a synergy of data sets, or they're all going to live in their little separate neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, which at the moment, the way the registry works is it wants to identify, the universe of data sets that pertain to energy and building stock and energy use. And so the idea of being able to characterize on one hand, GIS data sets that, set out the footprint area of buildings and cities. On the other hand, the environmental data that, heating degree days and cooling degree days, and then also, behavior use data. So at the moment, so many of them do sit in separate bins. And again, that's part of the basis of the exercise, is to say, well, of all these data sets, are there those that are interoperable? Are there those that are connected? And one of the strongest ways in which we see, really well procured data sets, through things like cross-sectional repeated surveys. I know that Rex and Bex in the US have, on one hand, an objective to try and describe the performance and usage of energy across the entire US building stock, which is a big ask. There's so many buildings and variety, but for various reasons. So that's the other thing. Each data set is developed and devised for its own reasoning. In the future, I think that we may get to a point such as our colleagues in South Korea, who have very extensive integrated data sets of building energy use, building construction features and the like. And they can use that for, let's say, evaluative purposes to go in and evaluate or identify hotspots of usage and kind of seek to work with the owners to improve that. Those are things that have a great deal of power, but of course they have a great deal of need to be managed carefully and confidentially and the like. So I think it's an opportunity for us to see how it is that we can increase data availability, but really more importantly is increase our knowledge and understanding of what's going on.
And yeah, just a final comment. I've understood that the data registry will be an open platform, so everyone who is interested in feed the system will be able to. So to input some data there, upload some data. And how are you going to manage this? Are you going to make some filter in which you are going to evaluate the quality of the data that is going to be uploaded?
Yeah, so at the moment, our aim is simply to register the data set. And although we do have a mechanism by which someone could upload a data set for broader sharing. So that means that, for example, we would seek colleagues from Brazil to register all the data sets that they are aware of, whether or not they have access to them, whether or not they're open, but just to describe these data sets exist in Brazil to help.
Okay.
And then the intention is, and we are working with colleagues at IERC, to actually develop a more sophisticated platform, exactly what you're describing, which is, look, some data sets should be there and, open access to everybody. Others, the data provider might want to input into the system, but do so in a way that maybe they don't want it to be shared more broadly, or researchers who want to come and work on a particular problem area, can do so without, risking, data leakage or access or things like that. So it is something, and as these point out about the quality, it's hard to assess the quality without seeing the data. And that's something which, again, in this advanced system that we're working on, with the IERC is to how better to ascribe quality indicators to data sets. Yeah, it's important.
Thank you.